Hi, I'm James Gaillard, and welcome to In Black and White, where we offer clear, challenging, and compelling conversations and commentaries on the issues that matter most. Whether it's public policy, personal development, a master's class, a critical conversation, a Bible study, or a subject in the news cycle, I hope today's episode informs you, and I hope it inspires you. Glad you're with me. I wanted to just take a moment and hang out and talk a little bit about our journey. As you know, we are 18 years old today. March 12th, 2005, we officially constituted Word Tabernacle Church. Really been an extraordinary journey. And I thought I would just spend a few minutes. I'm in my office hanging out. I've preached 2 services today, obviously 9 a.m. on our Rocky Mount campus and then 11 a.m. at our Tabernacle campus. We had decisions on all 3 campuses again today. Been a really extraordinary ride for us. And so I just want to talk a little bit and let you know. So this is just a podcast about the history of Word Tabernacle Church and how we got here. March 12, 2005, myself and 13 other people, 14 of us constituted this church here in North Carolina. One of the questions that people ask me all the time is, how in the world did you get from Philadelphia to Rocky Mount, North Carolina? And so let me start there. I was pastoring in Philadelphia. And while I was in Philadelphia, our church had received several awards on being one of the highest baptism churches in the state of Pennsylvania. And I got noticed by some people at the North American Mission Board and the International Mission Board. And they reached out and said, hey, would you go on a mission trip to South Africa? And so I wound up going on a mission trip to South Africa. I was actually assigned to, and this was 2003. And so went on a mission trip in 2003 to South Africa. We were there over the Thanksgiving holiday, really remarkable experience. I was in Potchefstroom and Soweto and Johannesburg and had an opportunity to go back many times to preach. I spent a lot of time in revivals, a lot of time working with NGOs, which are non-government organizations, and doing church planting. And so while I was there, I met a pastor, believe it or not, from Rocky Mount, North Carolina. His name was Michael Clore. Michael Clore pastored at the time Inglewood Baptist Church in our city. And Michael Clore approached me and he said, would you be willing to come back to Rocky Mount perhaps next summer and do a training on training pastors how to start churches? So he said, we have 3 pastors who want to start a church. And so as it would have it, when I got back from South Africa, I was actually preaching at a church in Wendell, North Carolina, Hepzibah Baptist Church. So when I got back, I got invited to do a D-Now conference, which stood for Discipleship Now, a D-Now conference at Hepzibah Baptist Church. And while I was there, when I left Hepzibah, I didn't know the distance between Rocky Mount and Wendell. And so found out how close it was and came here to Rocky Mount and actually had lunch after church with some of the leaders at Inglewood. And they asked me if I would come back and do a training the next summer. And so the summer of 2004, I came back. I did a training with 3 pastors, and the names are all escaping me. I know Pastor Whitaker, Pereira, who was a Hispanic church plant, and Tony, and Tony's last name was escaping me now. I'm not sure if he still pastors in our city. So I went in the summer. I taught basic training for church planners to help them get their church started. I actually preached at a couple of churches in Rocky Mount. And in all honesty, while I was here, I was like, wow, I really love this community. I love the city. And 3 or 4 months later, I get another call from Michael Clore, Pastor Clore at Inglewood. He says, one of the pastors that wanted to start the church has decided not to. I didn't know if you knew of a church planner or you had any interest yourself. And I had been praying during that time. And I said, you know what, I'm really sensing God may be calling me to Rocky Mount. So I came and prayed. I walked community. I prayed through South Rocky Mount and prayed in the sanctuary of 820 Nashville Road. It was an empty church that was owned by Inglewood Baptist at the time, and really felt God saying, this is where I want you. And so transitioned my church in Philadelphia came to Rocky Mount, didn't know anyone other than Michael Clore and a couple other pastors, right? None of them were leaving their church to come to our church. And I got here in December of 2004. So got here in December 2004, it was cold. And I lived in the parsonage at the back end of the church. And so have you ever been to 820 Nashville Road, where Greater Joy is now? There's a house on the back end, a little ranch house. The back of it is like right adjoins the parking lot of the church. And 726 Paul Street was the address. And so they told me I could stay there in the parsonage while I got the church started, or as long as I wanted for that matter. And so I got there one night, and had all my things in hefty trash bags. That's all I had. I didn't have any furnishings. It was just clothes and toiletries. And the heat was not working in the house. And it was in the end of December. And so I wound up sleeping on the second floor. It was a little area up there. There was like a little family room, small little room up there, but it was the only carpeted room in the house. And so I just bundled up. I slept with my clothes on and inside of a blanket, inside of the sleeping bag. And you've heard this story. I took my glasses off and, put them on the side and went to sleep. When I woke up, I had rolling over on my glasses. And keep in mind, I didn't have any money, didn't have any resources, didn't have a credit card. So I'm walking around with my eyeglasses, taped together, my first week here. We have a watch night service. Wasn't really a watch night service because we didn't have a church yet. But December 31st of 2004, myself and Audrey, a guy named Maurice Hosendorf, Matthew, my son, Kyle, my son, it was probably 6 or 7 of us. We just sang a song. I don't know what song it was, in the front of the room. And we prayed and we was like, God, we're going to start a service, next Sunday, and just bless what we do. And so for 3 months, in January, February, March of 2005, we had what we call preview services. And matter of fact, we didn't have any choir. We had a white baby grand piano on the stage, and we had a musician who was not sensitive culturally to us, but he was a volunteer and he was willing to help us. And so music was a little bit interesting in those days. But strangely enough, man, people were coming. Not a lot of people, but people were coming. And we started getting people saved. People started getting saved. And we did that for several months. That's when I met Pastor Richard Joyner at Conita Chapel Baptist Church, because on the 5th Sunday, don't know if this is still the case, it might be, on 5th Sunday, they didn't have church. So in January 2005, that month had 5 Sundays. And so Pastor Joyner he came to worship with us, and he brought his choir with us because we didn't have a choir. We didn't have any music department. And I still preach, but he was like, man, people need to hear you. I'm going to bring my choir so we can support you. And so he was the very first pastor I met in the community. We've remained friends to this day. So we had preview services up until the first Sunday in March. And then that second weekend, March 12th, on a Saturday, we met in one of the classrooms at 820 Nashville Road. And we voted to organize the church. And so Mr. Nathaniel Johnson, who's gone on to be with the Lord, he was present, as well as his wife, Katie Johnson, who's still in our church. And he made the motion that I be the pastor of that church. I made the motion, and it got seconded that we would form a church. And then he made the motion that I would pastor that church. And then the rest was history. We started Tuesday night Bible study in the classroom. And y'all, we had like 10 people at Bible study. Miss Naomi was there, and her husband, Mr. James Wright, who's now gone on to be with the Lord, and some other people, Peggy Hines, who just missed that meeting, probably would have been a constituted member because she's been around us that long. We had like 10, 15 people showing up at Bible study. And it was really weird because God said to me, I want you to take the Bible study to the sanctuary. And I was like, God, it's like 10 people here. But we were obedient and we were faithful. And that's been a theme, I think, faithfulness and obedience. And we took the Bible study to Tuesday night to the sanctuary. And like the next Tuesday, like 50 people were there. And then the Tuesday after that, like 100 people were there. And was actually more people coming to Bible study than Sunday worship, because people were just not, accustomed to just expositional teaching of the scriptures. And so we started Bible study, and then we started rocking and rolling. I lived there in South Rocky Mount for several years and dedicated my life to South Rocky Mount. I patronized all the businesses, went to my dry cleaner there, ate in whatever restaurants were there, and just, prayer walked the community. There were public housing close by, Williford Elementary School was across the street. And so we were just really trying to immerse ourselves in the life of the community. And so, fast forward to the end of 2005, the church is really growing significantly. And then we go into 2006 and, we have a little bit of a dispute with Inglewood Baptist Church over some doctrinal issues. And so they made a decision to not associate with us anymore, and that was fine. And we had some differences around divorce and around doctrinal issues around whether women should preach. And we had our strong positions on those doctrinally, and they did as well. And as a result, the pastor at the time, Michael Clore, requested that, we just not do ministry together. And so we kind of separated ties with Inglewood Baptist Church at that point. But we were in a position because of how everything transpired to acquire the building. And so we wound up acquiring 820 Nashville Road at the end of 2005. And then going into 2006, the church had grown so significantly that we had added a second service. And so now we're at 2 Sunday services in 2006. 2007, still the case. 2008, we go to a third service. We do that for 2008, 2009. We start with a 4 p.m. in the very beginning communion baptism service. And people are like, man, nobody's coming to church at 4 p.m. just for baptism and communion. And people will tell you, we always had a crowd of people at baptism and communion at 4 p.m. We formed a relationship with the Evangelistic Church of Deliverance and Bishop Cheek, who was just a jewel of a man, passed away several years ago. And so they would come and worship with us on communion. And we started alternating worshiping. Sometimes we worship in their church. Sometimes they would come to ours. And we built a great relationship with Bishop Cheek and Evangelistic Church of Deliverance. And so church continues to grow. We add a Saturday service that didn't work out well for us at all. It's just an object lesson in watching what other people do, making sure you're hearing God for everything. I knew God was saying, go to a third service. I had friends around the country who had growing churches who had Saturday night services. And I was like, man, that would be cool. Let's do that. It was miserable. I didn't even want to come to church on Saturday nights. And we did it, I guess, 3, 4, 5 months. I can't remember now how long it was, but we did that for several months. And then we decided to go to a third Sunday service. As soon as we did that, the church was full. And so we go to a fourth service. And then on first Sundays, we had 5 services every first Sunday. The rest of the Sundays, 4. And it was crazy because we had like a wheelchair ramp going into the sanctuary. And it was like pictures on the wall at 820 Nashville Road of different people worshiping and things like that. We're going to add that back. I've asked the design team to do that. And like people would be wrapped up around the wheelchair ramp waiting to get into the next service. And y'all, I was like so naive, I guess, or so I don't know what I was, but I wasn't realistic, that's for sure. So I was probably being just overly, I don't know what I was, but I insisted on, like, when we had like 2 services, I would preach the same text but a different message. And so what people would do is they would stay, and then we had to start asking people to leave the church. So literally we'd have to say, can y'all please not stay, because we have another group of people coming in. And so fast forward, 2010 timeframe, 4 Sunday services, every one of them full. The church seated about 450 people. And so, with those people and then our overflow rooms, we were seeing at that point 2,000 people a Sunday. The crazy thing about our growth was that, we've averaged 150 baptisms a year since we started the church. I mean, just last month we baptized 17 more, right? And so a lot of times people assume that all the growth of Word Tabernacle is transfer growth, people leaving a church. But the reality of it is over 2,500 people, and you get clapped for that, 2,500 people over that, I don't even know what the exact number is, have been baptized at our church. So over half of our membership, more than half of our membership, received Christ here. They got saved here. They began their walk here. And so We're at 4 services. Every service is full. We have parking problems. There's a gas station and a bank across the street from 820 Nashville Road. Literally, y'all listen to this. People would park at the pump. You didn't hear me. They would park at the pump. So the parking was so tight, they pull up to the gas station where a pump is and turn off their car and go into church. So then we start getting phone calls like, your people are like at the gas pump, but nobody in the vehicle because they're in your church. So we had to deal with all that drama, parking in front of people's driveways and people having to walk several blocks to get into the building. And, all of that, part of the reason, if you want to know why our services are so structured, we had to be in the beginning, right? We had no choice because we had to end the service, turn it over, fill the room back up, turn it over, fill the room back up. And we did that 4 times every Sunday and 5 times on first Sundays. In those days, on first Sundays, we would eat in the fellowship hall. So at the end of the 4th service, Miss Christine would cook and we'd have a culinary team and we'd all eat in the fellowship hall. And then we'd stay, hang around, watch football, whatever, and then go up to service for 4 o'clock for baptism and communion. So we knew we needed a bigger space and we started looking for larger space. And there was a building available on West Mountain Drive. We had looked at lots of places. During those days too, guys, we were doing some mission work at Claremont Apartments that they don't exist anymore down on Raleigh Road. So we renovated several apartments. We moved people into those apartments. We had a minister who wound up eventually pastoring, Pastor Reggie, who was living down there with his wife. And we were ministering to that community. We really wanted to buy it. It didn't all work out for us to buy it, but we managed it for a while. And eventually they wound up demolished. And I'm convinced that the new housing that's there now is because of seeds that Word Tabernacle Church planted. Seeds that things could be viable there and grow there and families could live there in a safe and healthy way. And so I applaud all of our work in the early days around Claremont Apartments because I know for a fact it was not wasted space. And so we began looking around. There was a lot down on Raleigh Road we looked at. I'm trying to think where else we looked at. So we looked at right where they just built that new storage place right off on 301, right at Sunset Avenue. That used to be like a strip plaza. And there was a Save-A-Lot, I think it was, or some type of grocery store, pizza place. We looked at that. We were considering buying that. And I think there was one more location. I can't remember. But in the midst of all that, a property on West Mount Drive, it was 66 acres. It had 3 buildings. It had an executive home, which we were going to make into our administration for the church. It had a warehouse, which we were going to make athletic space. And it had a 10,000 square foot unfinished house, 4 levels that we were going to turn into education space. So we had education, athletics, and administration already on the 66 acre campus. And so, and then we were going to build the sanctuary in between the athletic space and the education space. And so that was 2011. In 2011, we bought that property. We paid $1.2 million for it. And we started saving money to what I always call PM Park, right? And PM Park is like saving money so that, we can put in the right infrastructure. We had to run wastewater infrastructure so we could have the ample bathrooms and then to have paid parking before we would go ahead and put the building up. And the cost was pretty astronomical. And this is back in 2011. So while all this is going on, the Home Depot building closes down. And so we wound up, and let me fast forward. So we buy the property in 2011, but we're still worshiping. So now we have Westmount and we have 820 Nashville Road. So we still own both the properties. 2013, so 2011, I'm trying to give you big year dates. 2011, we acquired the property. 2013, a study comes out naming Word Tabernacle Church one of the 100 fastest growing churches in America. This is crazy because, churches on this list are like churches like the Potter's House and Andy Stanley's church and churches that are in like Dallas and Atlanta and large metropolitan areas, like Elevation Church in Matthews or Charlotte, North Carolina. So usually they're like in mega cities. We're one of the few churches in a smaller community. And in 2013, we were named the 67th fastest growing church in the entire United States. That is, how crazy is that? Because listen, when we came to Rocky Mount, Forbes magazine had just listed Rocky Mount as one of the 10 most impoverished communities in America. So we started a church in one of the most impoverished communities in America. And in what, 8 years time, 9 years time, we're deemed one of the fastest growing in the entire country. At that point, we were growing faster than 99.5% of every other church in America. There are 300,000 churches in America, and we were growing faster than almost all of them except for a handful, which is phenomenal. Like, God only can do that, right? So fast forward to 2014. We decide, we still haven't built out the Westmount, but Home Depot shuts down like in 12 or 13. Nobody's buying the building. We're now in 2014, and we're like, wow, the parking lot is there. It's 110,000 square feet of space, which is bigger than what we would buy or build rather. And our church at that point had become a regional church. So we had people driving in, as we do now, from like Roanoke Rapids. They were driving in from Raleigh, from Wendell, from Knightdale, from Zebulon, from Goldsboro, from Wilson, from Tarboro, from Winterville, right? So we had become a regional church. And we were like, well, we're a regional church. It might make sense to have a regional location. So we started negotiating with Home Depot. Guys, I can only tell you it was a miserable experience. Let's just say they were not a forthright group of people to work with. And so we wound up finally landing a deal and buying the former Home Depot for $2 million. Now this in and of itself is extraordinary, because most times when churches buy or when churches operate in like large factory warehouse kind of spaces, normally they lease the building. So they don't normally own it. And so this was something different. We bought the building. 7 banks turned us down. Every bank in our community turned us down. BB&T turned us down. Southern Bank turned us down. I forget all the banks. Everybody turned us down. We had $1 million, in the bank. So we could put a significant deposit down. We had audited financials, and we could not get any love from any bank. We called Mechanics and Farmer, the only African-American owned bank. And they looked at the project and they said, you know what, we want to be a part of this. We bank with them to this day. So they got behind our project. I'm forever indebted and grateful to them for that. And we actually we were banking at Southern Bank at the time. And, we had a significant amount of money in Southern Bank. We eventually wound up closing that account and moving our business away from Southern Bank because they, shared that they didn't want to do church projects, but we already knew that they had significant projects in the community with churches. And so for some reason, they just didn't want to work with us. And so that was fine. God had another plan, right? And it's interesting because every bank that didn't want to work with us then wants to work with us now. So you can clap your hands for that, because God is so faithful if we're faithful. And so we bought the Home Depot in 2014. And now we've got this issue of like, how do we like build out this place? And so we don't have the money to build the whole thing out. All we can do is create a space where we can worship in. So what we decided to do, we took a model from Pastor John Jenkins and First Baptist Church of Glen Arden, because they had bought, I don't know, like a Heckinger's or some kind of building like that they had converted as well. And the advice I was given was, hey, wherever the bathrooms are, determine, it's just a little known fact, people don't know this. So your bathrooms determine your seating capacity. It determines your occupancy, because you have to have a certain number of bathrooms to occupy a certain number of people. The way we came up with the design for our temporary sanctuary, which is now our banquet hall, is we said to our architect, which is Oakley Collier, a wonderful guy named David Griffin. And I said, look, this is how many bathrooms we have. How many seats would that allow us to get? And I want to say he said like 850 or something like that. And that's what we wound up doing. So we wound up taking just that corner of the building and building that out. So we'd have a place to worship. We could use the bathrooms. We could use that little break room. And then we had an empty space that's going to be that turned out being offices later on. That's eventually going to be the Center for Culinary Arts when we build out the commercial kitchen later on this year and next year. That was where the nursery was. And what was so crazy was you had to come to church. You had to take your children. You couldn't enter the sanctuary from where the childcare was. So you had to come in one door, go out another door. It was just really wild. But hey, we kept, people were joining and God was moving and people were getting saved and baptized. We had a temporary baptism pool that we've since now donated to another ministry. Now, while all this is going on, we were helping ministries. Like there was one church in the community that needed an organ. At one point, we had like 3 or 4 Hammond organs and Leslie speakers sitting in storage. We wound up gifting, an organ that was probably worth $8,000. You add the Leslie to it, it was probably a $10,000 gift to a church. We donated that to them. We helped the church put a roof on their building. So we were helping churches while we were kind of doing this as well. So 2014, we buy the Home Depot like August, I think. Well, the issue is Greater Joy is growing like crazy. They were on Anderson Street at the time. Shelton Daniel and I, who's the presiding bishop over their Reformation, he was senior pastor of Greater Joy at the time. He needed a bigger space. So his sanctuary was probably like 300, and this would move him up to like 450 or something like that, or maybe 250 to 450. You put some chairs in the aisles, you can get up to 500 at that old sanctuary. And so we strike a deal where we sell them the building for $500,000. It was about 50 cents on the dollar because it was appraised about $1 million. And so he's been a great partner and a great community supporter in South Rocky Mount. And we wanted to make sure that good ministry was happening in South Rocky Mount when we left. So they had to occupy and we had nowhere to go because our space wasn't ready. So that moves us into 9 weeks, I want to say it was. We spent 9 weeks breaking down and setting up every Sunday at Rocky Mount Senior High. I mean, screens, the band, the whole 9 yards, right? So we're breaking up and setting up. The crazy thing is people getting saved every Sunday. Yo, I preached a series out of Leviticus. Who preaches a series in Leviticus in a high school gym? And to show you how God works, it was a death of a teenager in our community that went to senior high. And we wound up having that funeral in the gym because we set up on Saturdays. And so we set up so that we can actually do the funeral. So we were even doing funerals at that time. And as you know, we do a lot of funerals. I have preached on average about 50 funerals a year for the entire time that I've been here. And so on average, because that's not every year, right? But personally preaching on average about 50 funerals a year. So, I'm knocking on the 1,000 funeral door in the time frame that I've been here. And most of that was community funerals. You see the wall of the members who have passed away, our memorial wall, but a lot of that was community funerals. So we were still doing funerals, 9 weeks setting them, breaking down. We're finally in our space. We get in the room. We said we're going to do 2 services. Both services were standing room only. We had put seats on the stage, seats going down the wheelchair ramp. I mean, we just had seats on top of seats. Couldn't house it. We didn't have overflow space because the rest of the building, just think about the banquet room. That's all we had. The rest of the building, we did not have a certificate of occupancy for. So we could not have overflow spaces. So for a short period of time, we actually added a 3rd service. So we were back to 3 services in this building. We did that for a while. And then while we were doing that, we built out the education space. So all the classrooms where our preschool is now, our gymnasium, our chapel, that's where the Reach Center was. So like Brother Albert, where his offices are now, the Reach Center was there. Forgot to mention, when we were at 820 Nashville Road, there was a little house next door to that building. We actually bought that house, and that's where we turned it into the Reach Center. Back in those days, it was the Impact Center. And as y'all know, you heard the story probably, we started that ministry on $100 a month budget, but we wanted to give back to the community and we wanted to be deliberate about it. And so we started with a $100 a month budget, all volunteer staff. Now they have paid staff, $1 million budget. And again, it's a testimony to you and your giving and God's faithfulness over our ministry and honoring our efforts to want to help people and do what's right by people. And so 2014, 9 weeks after setting up and breakdown, we move in. It's jam-packed in there. Go back earlier that year, 2014, I had my first major tragedy. My son Kyle died. He was in a car accident. He and two other young men, they were all preachers' kids. It was a really difficult time for me. I began questioning if God indeed had told me to come here. I was angry with God. It was really painful. We had to have sheriffs parked at our properties because the media was all over it. It was just a really difficult time in my life and the life of the church. At his funeral, my father in the ministry, Pastor Hall, flew in just to preside over his funeral. I preached it, but he presided. This, to this day remains one of the most difficult aspects of my being here. My son, Kyle, was my sound engineer in Philadelphia. I trained him. He went to school for it. He was really good with media, technology, photography, all that good stuff. And he was my sound engineer the entire time we were at 820 Nashville Road. And so he, ceased to be my sound manager, of course, once he passed away. And when I would look at the soundboard, even to this day, I miss my son. And it's one of the things that I struggle with God about, because I'm like, God, you knew all these great things were going to happen. I really wish my son had been here to be able to experience all of it. So, he did leave me with 3 great grandbabies and an added daughter now. I got a bonus daughter out of it. And so God is faithful and good, but it was a difficult time. And I share that because I think sometimes people think because you've succeeded or it seems as if you succeeded, that there's not been real tragedy and real difficulty. So 2014, my son dies. 2014, we also move into this building. We begin worshiping and things that people are getting saved, and we're building out the building. We're building out all the area I talked about. 2015, my dad dies. And so 2014, go back. Part of the reason why we have the cemetery where it is because I didn't want to bury Kyle in Garden of Gethsemane or anything, distant. So it wasn't always a plan to have a church cemetery, but when he died, I just felt obligated. And so we set that up. And, in setting that up, we have a cemetery now, 2,000 seats. And so 2,000 plots. So lots of people are buried over there now. And 2015, my dad dies. I had moved my parents here in this is what, 2023, 12. So like 2011, 2012 timeframe, I moved my parents here. I was able to move both my parents here, which was a tremendous blessing to be able to care for them. 2015, my dad dies. And so we funeralize him in the sanctuary. Fast forward to 2016, the Reach Center is growing. It was the Impact Center back then. We renamed it the Reach Center. It was growing, and there was a property available on Hunter Hill Road, a little house. And so we decided to buy that house on Hunter Hill Road, 921 Hunter Hill Road, and converted that into the Reach Center. And then 2018, there was another property, 917 Hunter Hill Road, that we purchased, another house. And we're actually going to probably start renovating on that this week or this year. So now we've got those 2 buildings. They're probably about almost 2 acres of land right there on Hunter Hill Road that we have. So that was 2016, 2018. Fast forward to 2020, COVID hits. And, trying to figure out what to do. We had just started building out. We were in these little small offices. I have this wonderful office now, and I'm grateful for that. But, there was a time where my office was like a closet. Literally, it's storage rooms now. It's how tiny it was. It's probably, I don't think it was 8 feet by 8 feet. It was just that small. Those were our offices. For a while, we had offices in the warehouse on Westmount Drive. And so we had, it's just crazy, y'all, all of the experiences over the years and how God has stayed faithful and kept moving so much. So 2020, COVID hits, and God instructs us to finish out building the building. Like, while nobody's coming to church, he's like, go for it. And so we decide, we're obedient and faithful, and the finished product, right? That God blessed us to be able to build out the 2,000 seat plus seat sanctuary, a center for media and broadcast, a banquet facility, enlarge the chapel, create new spaces, 500 persons seat that can be seated in the lobby, bookstore, welcome center, prayer spaces, cry rooms. You name it, it's all here. And I left out one pivotal part of all this. I'm off the cuff with this, y'all. Right around 2019, I want to say, we got approached by a pastor in Tarboro, and Pastor Dorothy Purvis. And she had been pastoring many years in Tarboro community. They had managed to build a 300-seat sanctuary on a 6-acre piece of land in Tarboro. And she said, the Lord laid you upon my heart. Would you be willing to take over the facility? And so we prayed about it. We had been offered opportunities. Like, we got offered an opportunity to take over a church in Wilson, but we didn't feel God telling us to do that. This one, we did feel God telling us to do it. And so that's how our Tarboro campus got started. Unfortunately, COVID kind of shut all that down. We were able to renovate the building, but we didn't get started in full force until Easter 2022. And so Tarboro coming up on a 1-year anniversary. And so those are just some of the highlights in terms of how the last 18 years have shaken out. I want to thank you for the journey. I want to thank you for trusting me. I want to thank you for faithfulness. I want to thank you for believing in me. Think about it. A guy from North Philly shows up by way of South Africa to Rocky Mount, North Carolina. And when he gets there, people approach him like Ella Barrett, and Katie Johnson, and Naomi Wright, and they say, we had been praying for you. That's what they told me. We had prayed for you. And so I know that this is of God. And we've had our hiccups, guys. Let me be really clear. Lots of people join, people leave, right? Lots of people we funeralized, so we people have died. And so 2020 was hard. We started rebuilding. 2021, we started trying to figure it all out. We were really aggressive. We kept doing ministry. 2022, August 16th, my mama passes. And, that has hit me like nothing else I've ever experienced. I don't really know what to say about that. So people see all of this, right? Thousands of people saved, thousands of people baptized, thousands of people joining the church. But in the 18 years that I've been here, I've buried a son, a dad, and a mom. My mother being, my biggest cheerleader and my biggest advocate and supporter, who only ever lifted me up. I can't begin to tell you how significant of a loss that has been for me. I honor God for all of it, but it has not been without its challenges. And so here we are going into year 19, having celebrated our 18th anniversary. I'm believing great things, and we're already planning for our 20th anniversary. Don't know when God will release me. I think I'll be here at least until the church is 25 years old. There's work I want to see us get done. Let me tell you a little bit about that work before we end today. And I hope this was good, helpful. Just leave me a comment about it. One of the things we want to do is build out the Westmount Drive location. Over the years, I acquired the house, the executive house, and the 7 acres that sits on. I want to see that converted into a wedding venue and a restaurant. And then I want to build some senior citizen apartments over at our property. I want to put some ball fields in, athletic facility, some tennis courts, running track, softball field, baseball, football field. Want to do some of that kind of work, a retreat center. And so I want to create a campus dedicated to health and wellness and gathering of people. And so that's going to be our work. I want to also see that we form a foundation, a true foundation where we're spending the interest of what we have invested in. We're not spending the money as it comes in. I could go on and on about the hundreds of programs, about the ambassador scholarships. You already know we've given over $150,000, $175,000 of scholarships. I want to convert that so those scholarships come out of an endowment and not out of the bank account. So that's one of my major goals, so that the work that we do can continue in perpetuity. Those are the two big next things for us. So I need everybody to jump on board, right? Thank you for everything that you're doing. This is over the years, our vision statement changed. Our vision statement is now everyone thriving. And our mission statement is people empowering people and communities in all areas of life to the glory of God. So we want to see people grow in their finances and in their faith, and in their fitness, and in every area of their life and their family. And so I thank you for being a part of this journey and being a part of this walk. Hey, y'all, let's see what God does in this next season. Let's watch God move in extraordinary ways. And so, hey, that's the history of Word Tabernacle Church. Get ready for an amazing 19th and 20th, all the way through year 25. Our goal is to get debt free for our 20th anniversary. I'm going to be talking about that at the next business meeting. And our goal, so 3 big goals: debt free, forming a foundation, and developing our Westmount properties. Those are our big goals for the next, I'm hoping the next 2 years we can get some of that work done. I don't think we'll get it all done, but we can get some of it done. Your faithfulness, your support has just been extraordinary. Thank you for the journey. Family, community, happy 18th anniversary. Well, we're out of time for today. I hope the episode informed you. Hope it inspired you. If you enjoyed it, would you go ahead and subscribe to my podcast? Would you also consider following me on one of our social media outlets, whether it's LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram at JD Gaillard. We'd love to also hear your ideas about future episodes. So go ahead and email me at james@jamesgaillard.com. And finally, go ahead on my website, jamesgaillard.com, and respond to our poll for the week. Thanks again for listening. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you next time.